My name is Adam Hamilton. I'm the senior pastor of the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in the Kansas City area. I'm the author of a few books, and I am the host of this podcast, Making Sense of Faith. And in this podcast, I envision you're joining me for a conversation. And typically, we're talking about various matters of faith, theology, scripture. But from time to time, I envision having guests join our podcast. And today we have our very first special guest, and this is Herb Kohn. And I want to tell you just a little bit about Herb Kohn. So Herb has a celebrated career in law. The last 32 years, he was at Bryan Cave in his law career before he started his own practice in mediation. He's a distinguished alumni from the University of Michigan Law School. He is the Henry Block Human Relations Award recipient of 2019. 14 times he was listed as among the best lawyers in America. He was twice voted Best Rainmaker in Missouri. He was Baron of the Boardroom. He received the Baron of the Boardroom Award from the Bench Bar Conference of 2008, Missourian Award, and so many more than I can possibly think to mention. I've invited him here not to talk about law, though he could talk circles around me when it comes to law or mediation, although we might get a little bit to mediation. But I've invited him here to share a bit of his story from his early childhood. Herb, thank you for joining us today. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you're here. Really appreciate you being here.
I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. When I heard your story, by the time I got to the end of your story, I was moved to tears. And I also thought the chance to, so we had a chance to have lunch together. We've talked together a few times. The chance to hear your story was one I wanted to give a whole lot of other people. So can you just tell us, let's start. You were born in 1938 in Holland.
I was born in Amsterdam. My parents came from Germany. They left Germany when Hitler rose to power, thinking that they needed to get out of there, and they thought that Holland would be a safe place to go because, well, it wasn't Germany. That turned out not to be the case, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it was after they moved to Holland that I was born in Amsterdam.
It's amazing. Tell us about your, first of all, your grandfather, or your grandparents maybe, and I know in particular your grandfather on your mother's side and what he did, and then about your dad and mom.
Well, my grandfather, my mother's father, owned a children's book company called Pestalozzi, and it was a very successful business. When Hitler came to power, he was forced to sell that business for the equivalent of $100. The rest of the money went to the state. And my father, who was a very successful attorney, owned a couple of electrical part factories, and he also lost those when Hitler came to power.
And tell me about your mom and dad. What are your memories of them? What were they like?
Well, that's a difficult thing to say because there's like two different, or actually three different facets to their lives. The first was their pre-Hitler life, which was a very high society type life. They were doing very well, very comfortable. And then there's the second phase or facet, which was the Hitler years, when they were in hiding in Holland and Belgium. We'll talk about that in a minute too. And then the third facet was when they came to the United States and started a new life. So they were strong. They endured all that. It wasn't easy. And as you know, we lost my grandfather in the process when we lived in Belgium.
You have a photograph of your grandfather, your mother. This was before your mother was married. And it looks like a beautiful family. I'm assuming they're in Nuremberg, or...
They were in Fürth, which is a suburb of Nuremberg, and they had a beautiful house, and you have a picture of that.
Yeah.
The picture is the occasion of a wedding when everyone is all dressed up in their finest. Yep. And you can tell that it was a house of culture and good standing and happiness.
Yeah. So they fled to Holland, and it's there that you're born. Tell us about so there were 4 years that you lived in Holland. Am I correct about this?
Yes. It's hard for me to remember the exact dates, but we moved from when Hitler took over Holland, which wasn't very difficult. He just walked in and took it. My parents decided that the thing to do was to go to Switzerland, which was a neutral country. And the way to Switzerland was from Holland to Belgium to Brussels, and then Brussels take a train to Zurich. That was the plan. The plane got waylaid when we crossed the border from Holland to Belgium. We got stopped by the border patrol, which was partly Gestapo, partly border patrol, and there's another story there of how we managed to get out of that situation. Do you want me to talk about that?
Why don't you go and tell? I think it's a fascinating story.
Well, we were taken on the way. We were taken to jail, and on the way there, I was on the bicycle with my mother. My sister was on a bicycle with my father.
No, let me pause. So you were being arrested, but you still were on your bicycles, and they had you ride your bicycles to the jail where the Gestapo is taking you there. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct. So on the way there, my mother whispered to me to get ready because we were about to fall.
And you were sitting on a seat on the handlebars, right?
I think, I don't
were you in
know,
the
I
back?
think I was sitting behind her,
Okay,
I'm not
okay,
sure.
all right.
But anyway, she said we're going to fall, and we did fall. And in fact, I have a bruise on my leg still from that fall. The reason that she said we're going to fall is that she pretended to faint, and while they were trying to recover, my father went to a farmhouse in front of which he had chosen to fall and exchanged some Dutch money for Belgian money. And that money was then used at the police station or the border patrol station to pay a fine or to bribe, I'm not sure what you call it. We did that, and they let us go on to Brussels. However, by the time we got to Brussels, because we spent so much time at the border, we missed our train to Zurich. And this sounds almost comical, but because we missed our train by a couple of hours, we spent the next 4 years in Belgium, again in hiding as we had been in Holland.
Describe for us, so when I think of your story, I'm thinking about the Diary of Anne Frank, where she's been in hiding for some time. Help us understand what your family's experience was of hiding. What would have happened if you had been found? Who hid you? Tell us about this.
Well, the big difference between my family and the Anne Frank family was that they chose to stay in one place. If you've probably seen the movie and read the book, and you know that they were upstairs behind some false walls, and that's where they stayed, along with some other people. Our family moved around a lot. I don't know how many times, probably 10 to 15 times in Holland and Belgium. We kept moving. Some people took us in because they thought it was the right thing to do, and some people took us in because we paid them. And then when we ran out of places to hide in Brussels, we moved to a small town outside of Brussels called Rozier and spent the last year of the war there.
And talk about who took you in Rozier.
Rozier, we were taken in by a farmer, and my mother talked to the priest at the Catholic Church, and I don't know what their conversation was, but as a result of that conversation, the priest allowed my sister and myself to attend school, Catholic school, and of course we also attended Catholic church on Sunday, and all the people in the school, the kids, thought we were Catholic, and so nobody bothered us.
And they actually gave you a new last name, is that right?
They gave us a new last name, which was Peters. I don't know how Peters was chosen, but at that point in my life, whatever I was told to do, I did. I never questioned anything.
Yeah. And you were there until the war ended when you were 8, is that right?
Yes, we were there. We knew the war was over when we saw some British airplanes dipping their wings at us, and that was the end of the war. After that, we went back to Amsterdam and waited for permission to come to the United States.
That's really something. Well, tell us about, were there any close calls where you might have been caught or captured?
There probably were, but I was not told about them. I wasn't aware of them. A lot went on that I didn't know about. As I said, at that point in my life, I just did what I was told to do and didn't ask any questions and didn't look around. And
Yep.
I learned to keep my head down, which I did. None of the four of us, my parents or my sister or myself, were captured. My grandfather was.
Yeah, tell
And,
us that story of how your grandfather was captured.
Well, this was in Brussels. My grandfather and my grandmother came separately. They did not come with us over the border on bicycles. I'm not sure how they got to Brussels, but they did. And my grandfather was on a bus one day with false identification, but the bus was stopped by the Gestapo and everyone was searched, and he was determined to be a Jew. And so he was taken immediately to prison. And from that prison, he was taken sometime later, I think not very long later, to Auschwitz. And that's where he died.
Yeah. And we're going to come back to that at the end of because I wanted you to share part of his last letter. So do you have other extended family that died in the Holocaust? I'm assuming that they're cousins or others that might have lost their lives in the...
No.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, my father's family fled. Well, part of my mother's family went to France and changed their name and did fine. They didn't lose anyone in that family. My father's family went to Israel or Palestine, as it was then called, and they survived. So, as far as I know, no one else.
That's amazing. So, when you think about the people who took you in, I'm just guessing you don't remember any of them in particular, although you were 8 when you finally left. But
I do remember some.
Do you?
Yeah, I remember our living quarters were either in attics or basements, and I remember that, and I remember being allowed out to eat a meal, and that was about it. My mother and grandmother worked as housekeepers for the families that we stayed in. And I went to school in Brussels. I remember that. Of course, I had to switch languages from Dutch to French, which when you're that age, you can do pretty easily. Same as I did from Dutch and French to English when we came here. Yeah. I didn't know a word of English when we came here, but within a year, I spoke English with seemingly no accent, except maybe a Missouri drawl, and could not speak a word of Dutch or French.
Yeah.
Kids can do that.
That's amazing. So the children that you went to school with did not know that you were Jewish. They did not know that you were hiding.
They did not.
Okay. And
now, when you asked about the people, I have to go back to the nuns and the priest in Rosier, because the nuns knew who we were and what our story was. And 2 of the nuns came many years later to Kansas City to visit my family.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So there was a risk that they were taking, a personal risk that they were taking in protecting you.
Yes. Yes, they could have been found out and they would have been arrested the same as anybody else who hid or otherwise took care of Jewish people that were here.
I think those are, we hear stories like this from time to time of people who are willing to take great personal risk in order to save or protect other people. I think that's, and I'm grateful that there were some folks who were of faith who were doing that.
They're out there.
Yeah,
they're out there, and some of them have been recognized over the years. And you've seen movies about some of them, and books have been written about some. And some did it, as I said a few minutes ago, because they were paid to do it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm guessing these Catholic priests and nuns were not paid to do it. They were just simply doing it. No. I was in Krakow, Poland this last summer, and we had a chance to visit the area where Schindler's factories were, of Schindler's List, and then went to Auschwitz to walk through the concentration camp. And what's haunting is, I think about your grandfather who was killed there. And what's haunting is you walk in and they have speakers and they're reading the names of every person who came through Auschwitz. I mean, there were, 1 million people or more who went through Auschwitz. And it's just this constant, you just hear this voice in the background, another name. And you walk through the corridors of the buildings that were there, where some were prison cells where people were kept, some were administrative buildings. But you walk through, and you mentioned to me before this, the Germans kept meticulous records. And so you see the pictures of people, and these look to me like, the kind of official documents that they would have had as you look up there and just think, every one of these was somebody's grandfather or father or sister or brother or child. And finally, there's only one of the gas chambers that's left. The Nazis blew them up before they left, but and a crematorium. And I had a group of teenagers with me that was taken there from these were 18 and 19-year-olds. And for 3 hours, just total silence as we walked through.
Well, I think that's right. Now, it's the same silence you get at the Holocaust Museum in D.C.
Yep.
You can spend 4 hours in there, and not hear a word.
That's right. You've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were when you walked through, as somebody who lived and survived this, what were your feelings when you walked through the Holocaust Museum in D.C.?
I'm not sure they were that different from anybody else's that walks through there. It's a feeling of you see the pile of shoes,
Yep.
and you can't believe that it actually happened. And then I don't know if you saw the Auschwitz here,
Mm-hmm.
not far away, not long ago, not far away,
Yeah.
at Union Station. And there was a large picture on one of the walls of a rally that Hitler held, and there were tens of thousands of people attending that, and they loved him, they idolized him. So you hear about, well, Hitler made everybody do that. Well, no, they were with him. He was their hero, and Sieg Heil was something that they voluntarily did.
Yeah. That exhibit was amazing, the exhibition. But the part that got me was the same thing that you just said. It was a blown up photograph. It was covered an entire wall.
Right.
And you saw these, what appeared to be middle class, upper middle class people, maybe more, upper class people. And they're cheering, they're celebrating, they're laughing, as Hitler's coming down the road. And you realize, again, he was a very popular figure.
Yeah, he did not force himself on the people. They elected him,
Right.
and they liked him.
Yeah.
And
How do you think he went from simply being a popular figure to being able to commit the heinous crimes against humanity that he did? With all of these people who elected him, how did that happen?
I don't know the answer to that question. I can tell you what may have been the case, which is the same thing that happened here in the 30s, in the early 30s, the last days of Hoover and the first days of FDR. There were a lot of people suffering economically, and when you're suffering economically, you need to blame somebody because it's not your fault. You didn't do anything, so it's got to be somebody else's fault. And Hitler gave him somebody to blame.
Yeah, yeah. And what's the warning in that for us today? How do we avoid repeating that? Because we've seen that throughout history. We saw it in Africa in various countries, the Hutu killing the Tutsi. We see it in Asia and Cambodia. We see it in parts of the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, and you see it here, the anti-Arab and the anti-Semitism, which has sprung forth on college campuses and in other areas, other parts of the country. It's there, and this is. People wonder why I did this speech at the Henry Block dinner, because I had not talked about my past at all, ever.
Yeah, which I find amazing that you hadn't told the story for all those years.
I was asked this at Boy State where I talked about this, my background, and. I think my feeling was that when I came here, I wanted to, whatever I did or didn't do, it turned out to have been a good life. But I wanted that to be because of what I did here, not either because of or in spite of my background. So I didn't talk about it. I didn't lie about it. If somebody asked me where I was born, I would tell them.
Right.
And if they asked more questions, I would answer them. But I didn't talk about it. And this was the first time when I gave that speech about my story, as I called it, that I did talk about it. And one of the reasons I did, this is the point I was getting to, one of the reasons I did is because anti-Semitism, which was so prominent in Germany in the 30s and other places, including here, was coming back and is coming back. And we need to be careful about that.
Yeah. We think about the human condition and our natural tendency as human beings that we have to overcome is as you mentioned, looking for someone to blame, looking for a scapegoat, looking to feel better about ourselves by diminishing another human being. And in America, that's been done by race. It's been done sometimes by gender. So, I mean, there's just a whole host of ways that we can diminish others and elevate ourselves, which is the undercurrent. And for Christians, we talk about that as sin. Well, Jews as well talk about that as straying from the path that God intended,
Right.
where we were meant to love and care for one another and treat each other with justice and righteousness, but instead we have this tendency. And you've named some of what that looks like today.
It's here today, and as I said, you need to be really careful because it does not take much to get from undercurrent to prominence.
Yeah. And for people to believe in these things, I think we see that with sometimes misinformation, disinformation, but we find it's easy to spread rumors. It's easy to say things, to make assumptions about people. And those assumptions, given the right set of circumstances, can give birth to violence. And
it's easy to lie.
Yeah.
And it's easy to repeat a lie over and over and over till somebody thinks, well, it's not a lie. I've heard it enough times now, it's probably true.
Yep, that's exactly right. When you think about the rest of your life here in the United States, so those first 8 years, how did they? Often we think our experiences in our earliest years are formative for shaping who we become as a human being. How did the rest of your life? How was it shaped by those first 8 years?
I don't know the answer to that. I think it has to have been a factor, but it's not one that I ever stopped to think about. When we came here, as I said earlier, although I didn't speak a word of English, I knew that I wanted to be an American, and I no longer wanted to be somebody from Europe. And so the rest of my life was what I made it. And as I said a few minutes ago, it turned out to be a good one, but it wasn't because of or in spite of my background.
Yeah. One place I wonder about, in answer to this question, is you've devoted a lot of your life, in addition to your working career, to lifting other people up. So I think about your concern with the boys, not Boys Home, remind me.
Boys State.
Boys State.
Yeah,
Thank you,
there's
Boys
a
State.
huge difference.
Yeah, big difference. But still, investing in young people, investing in their lives. I mean, how has, you've served in a variety of capacities, in the Kansas City area. I just wonder if you're yearning to have a positive impact on other people and on the community isn't shaped in some way by those early years.
It may be. I don't know. I mean, if I thought it had, I would tell you, but I'm not sure if it had.
Herb, tell us about the rest of your career. Summarize the rest of your life. You met a girl and you got married. Tell us about that. And then
I met a girl in Detroit, Michigan. I saw her cross a lobby of a theater before I met her, and decided that was probably the one that I wanted. And we've now been married 64 years.
That's amazing.
It turned out to be the one that I wanted. And it's been a good life. And most of it has been in Kansas City. We lived in San Francisco for 4 months, where I helped open a new office for the law firm. We've traveled a lot. Interestingly enough, my grandfather's children's book company, when the war ended as part of the reparations treaty, we got back a small ownership piece.
Really?
I mean, he owned 100%. We ended up with, I can't remember exactly, about 30%, I think. But it was enough that I was on the board of the company and went to, I'd never been to Germany before because I was, they had left Germany before I was born. But we went back to Germany for a meeting every May, a board meeting, and Nancy would go with me, and then we would go someplace else from there. But my relation, and I was very worried the first time I went, and I was especially worried the first time that I took an airplane, and in those days they didn't have jetways for all the planes, so the plane would stop in the middle of the field, and you'd be taken by bus to the terminal. I was really nervous getting on that bus. And that, I think, comes from my grandfather having been on the bus when he was taken.
Interesting, yeah.
So that was scary. But after that, our relationship with the people that owned the rest of the company was an excellent one. And we've made lifelong friends with some of the people that I met through that.
Wow.
And being on the board was very interesting too.
Yeah. Do you still own a partial share? Is the business still there?
No, we sold it in the 90s to a Swiss company.
Okay. All right. So just give me a summary of your working career then. What you did for your years with Bryan Cave.
Well, I was with another law firm first. But when I got out of law school, I clerked for the chief judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit. Mm-hmm. And that was for a year. And then I came back here and joined another firm called Lindy Thompson. Eventually, I became chairman of that firm, and then we tried to merge that firm. That's another long story. But anyway, I ended up at Bryan Cave, which was an international firm. The Lindy firm was a local firm. And then I spent the next 30 years at Bryan Cave. During that time, I was active outside. I was chairman of the Kansas City Art Institute board. I was on the Truman Library board. I'm still a trustee of a law school in Massachusetts. Nancy got very interested in the arts. She became a docent at the Nelson. Mm-hmm. So I was on civic. A lot of the activities that you would expect a young lawyer to be involved in.
What kind of law were you practicing? I know you were in international law, but what did you have a focus there?
I was doing corporate law.
Okay.
And that's what I'm doing with the mediation. I'm doing business matters mediation. I'm not doing divorce or personal injury.
Okay. So let's talk about that for a second. When did you start your mediation practice?
A year ago, March.
Okay. You've already told us you were born in 1938. So how old were you when you started this practice?
I must have been 84.
Okay. So I think most people think by the time you're 68 or 67, you can receive full retirement benefits from Social Security, you're going to retire. But you show no sign of letting up. So what gives there? Teach us as an 84-year-old why you started a new law practice.
Well, that was 2 years ago, so I'm even older now. Yeah. I never wanted to retire. I never thought about retiring. And I've been very fortunate. We did well enough that we could do whatever we wanted to do without retiring. I could do it while I was working, mm-hmm. and that's still the case. We spend time in Arizona now. We have a place there, and we take trips. We want to take trips, and I can do all that and not retire. So I have no reason to retire. I like going to the office. I've always liked, even during COVID, I was one of the few people that went to the office every day because I like doing it.
Yeah, sure. Well, and it's interesting in Scripture, both in the Hebrew Bible as well as in the New Testament, there is no real concept of retirement. Now, the Levites had to retire at 55. I think it was 55 because they had to carry heavy stuff around, and so. But otherwise, there's no such thing as retirement. Moses was 80 when God called him to lead the children of Israel out of slavery.
You know, when you talk about the men carrying loads, it made me think of, I've been to India 3 times, and there the women carry the loads.
Interesting.
The men mainly sit and smoke.
Yeah, I think that happens in a number of places around the world. Oh, well, we're not going to comment on that other than to say that's probably not a very fair way to do it.
But maybe we should eliminate that from the...
Exactly. Talk to us about, we're going to come back in the end to talk about your grandfather and the last letter he wrote from Auschwitz. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about mediation. How you've got parties who have strong disagreements with each other, and you're trying to help them find a way forward. Can you describe in a nutshell how that works and what that might mean for our daily lives where we have people that we're in conflict with?
Well, the first thing I tell people when they come in, the 2 parties when they come in, and they may be 2 individuals or maybe 2 companies, 2 whatever it is, and sometimes it's more than 2, but usually it's 2. I tell them that they're there voluntarily, which is true. And everything they say to me is confidential. And the result that I'm hoping for is that they reach agreement, which is probably not one that they totally like, but it's one that they can live with. And that they have a strong side of the story, but they need to recognize that there is another side, and I'm going to be hearing that side too, and I'll report back to them. As I said to you before we started, one of my favorite sayings is that even the thinnest pancake has two sides. Mm-hmm. And in mediation, you learn that there are always at least two sides.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, just in my pastoral work, you'll hear people who, you know, inevitably, both in marriages as well as in just conflict, even within the church, you'll find conflicts happen. But there's always two sides, and it's, you know, in some cases one side might be closer to more of the truth, but they both have some part of the truth, some piece there. How do you bring them together when they have strong convictions that each of them are right?
Well, it takes a long time. I mean, sometimes it can take a full day and then some, and sometimes you don't get it resolved. They agree that it's not going to happen. I've had some of those, and in a couple of cases, we've scheduled another mediation session, either weeks or months later, to try again. Yeah. But because they're there, and because they're there voluntarily, you have to assume that there's some desire to resolve it, and you just need to keep digging to see where that is.
Yeah, interesting. How does what you do as a mediator, can you see any way that also connects with national politics, where we've got Republicans and Democrats, and it seems like we're less inclined to work for a common solution? I think that's not always true. There are places they do come together, but it seems as though you have two parties who each are trying to make sure they look better than the other in the end when it comes time to reelect somebody. Yeah. If you were in Washington, D.C., and you were chief mediator of Congress, what would you do?
I don't know. I think Washington today is very different than Washington was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Washington 20, 30 years, a lot of things have changed. One is that everybody goes home for weekends now. And in those days, 30, 40 years ago, they stayed in Washington, and even though they would fight all day over legislation, whatever it was, or appointments or confirmations, at the end of the day or at the end of the week, they would go have dinner together. Yeah. And that doesn't happen anymore. And I think they, with the primaries having gotten as vicious as they are, and as I'm trying to keep from making this a political discussion,
that's good.
which is not easy. But I'm trying.
No, exactly.
But there is pressure on them not wanting to get primaried, as they call it. Mm-hmm. And so that makes it even more difficult because they think they have to move further right or further left than their opponent to pick up the vote of the base of whichever party it is.
Right. When most of us are somewhere closer to the center than the bases are.
Absolutely.
Which is why most of us are frustrated by what we see in politics. Yeah. Is that primarying.
Well, I think we could spend another half hour on that.
We easily could. All right. So tell us about your grandfather and what happened, you know, the end of his life and then this letter that he wrote to your grandmother, which I found so moving.
Well, as I said earlier, my grandfather was taken off a bus in Belgium, in Brussels, and was taken to a prison or jail, I guess it was, and from there he was transferred to Auschwitz. And he wrote a lot of letters from Auschwitz, and somehow, and nobody's been able to figure it out, somehow those letters, after the war ended, came to my grandmother. And this may be part of the German efficiency system that we talked about earlier, that they kept, stored, cataloged, whatever they did, and they were made available. The letter that you're referencing, which I talked about when I did the Henry Block dinner, was a letter that he wrote on the day that he knew he was going to be taken to the gas chamber. And that's the letter that of all the letters, that's the one that I think is the most poignant.
That's astounding to think he knew this was the day he was going to die.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of them knew.
Yeah.
Again, because it was the German machine was so efficient that this group's going to go today, this group's going to go tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, what I loved about this letter, so you're going to read an excerpt from it as we close, but what I loved about this letter is I thought about my own wife and my life with Levon. We've been married 42 years. You've been married, 64 years?
Yeah.
And the love I have for her, and thinking about, I could almost hear your grandfather reading these, writing these words to your grandmother.
Yeah.
So would you read those to us?
I would. And you're probably going to think this is a difficult thing for you to hear. I just want to let you know that it's a difficult thing for me to read as well.
Yes.
So, but I'll do my best. So this is a translated part of a letter that he wrote, as I said, on the day that he knew he was being taken to the gas chamber. And I'll quote, "Today I want to write a word of love for you alone. God knows whether it will ever reach you, but it unburdens my own heart, which feels your suffering hour after hour. I regret every opportunity when I did not tell you how much I love you and how much happiness you have given me. Even though there were differences of opinion or ways of thinking, I would fight for you today with the same fervor as I did 36 years ago. In these days, my thoughts go back to happy memories in our garden and on our trips to the forest. During these very last days, we stay unparted, either in our lifetime or if it is time for me to die. Forever and however it will be, my heart and soul will always be with you."
That is just so beautiful. So beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for being willing to share that with us.
Well,
And my hope and prayer was that you all who are listening to this podcast would just enjoy this conversation, and that as as we ended with these words, that it would touch your heart as well. And what struck me was also, the deep affection they had, and with his last moment, to be able to communicate one more time, this is how I love you, and even in death, I will continue to love you. And
he said it well.
he said it well. He said it well. I want to thank you for joining us today for this podcast. It's been a blessing to have a chance to have Herb here with me today, and I hope that you were touched by his story as well. From time to time, we're going to have special guests who will be joining me and just sharing a bit of their story. Hope you'll join us next week for the podcast once more. And again, I want to thank Herb. Really appreciate you being with us today.
You owe me lunch.
I owe you lunch now. I do. I absolutely do. All right. Thank you so much. Join us next week.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Making Sense of Faith with Adam Hamilton. Do you know someone wrestling with life's biggest questions? Share this episode with them, because the more people willing to embrace the hard questions, the better. Do you want to go deeper? You can visit makingsenseoffaith.com to find the show notes and additional resources. That's also where you can sign up to get the notes and resources delivered straight to your inbox. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe and leave us a rating in your podcast player. That'll make sure that you get the latest episodes and help others find the podcast. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that notification bell to catch future episodes and videos there. Until next time, remember that your questions matter. Doubts are normal, and making sense of faith is a lifelong journey. We'll see you on the next episode of Making Sense of Faith.